Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Anthony Mueller, your host, the wine advocate reviewer for Washington State and South Africa for the Wine Advocate. Today, I have a very amazing guest, Samantha O'Keefe, coming all the way from South Africa, from Greyton. Get her in here. Hope everyone's having a great week. There she is. Hello, Sam.
Hi,
How are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
Oh, can't complain. It could always be worse. I try to be the eternal optimist. So, welcome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day and busy schedule. I know that a lot of things are going on right now, and it's late as well. So, thank you so much for taking the time. For those of our readers and viewers in the States, can you please go ahead and introduce yourself and give us a quick background and a little history on Lismore State, please?
So my name's Samantha O'Keefe. I have a farm called Lismore in South Africa. I'm born and raised in California, for those of you who are confused by the accent. And about 20 years ago, I moved to South Africa. I bought a farm in the middle of nowhere at the top of a mountain in a really cool climate area that had never been known for wine grapes. And 20 years later, that area called Greyton is a wine of origin or an appellation because of what I did at Lismore. I'm producing about 80,000 bottles of wine a year. And yeah, I'm a passionate winemaker in South Africa, making a lot of cool climate wines and loving what I do.
That's fantastic. Yeah, your wines are absolutely stellar and fantastic. I actually had chosen your 2017 Reserve Chardonnay for the top 5 of the year for last year's New York Matter of Taste. So you joined us for that in New York. So thank you so much for joining us there.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, we actually do have a beautiful, beautiful bottle of 2017 Reserve Chardonnay.
Me too.
Awesome. So we'll be getting into that just a touch from now. For our readers who've been following us, they've probably heard by the end of last year, you suffered a massive setback and tragedy with the loss of your home, your cellar, and about 50% of your vineyards with a very destructive wildfire in Greyton. Take us back to mid-December of 2019, and what are your thoughts? What were your thoughts as the fire was happening and coming down the mountain to your property?
Yeah, well, on the 17th of December, a fire, as you said, had been burning in the local reserve, which was about 10 kilometers away. And it had been burning for about 7 days. And I had no reason to really believe that it would threaten Lismore. Lismore is really high up in the mountain and would seem quite a vulnerable target, but the fire wasn't really nearby. And then the morning of the 17th, the wind turned and it raced to the top of the mountain range above Lismore and then came down from the mountain. And my home that I built with my kids and had been there for 17 years, my cellar, my entire 2019 vintage, and about 40% of the vineyards, including some of my pets, all were destroyed that day. So that was about 6 months ago. And, obviously it's been an interesting 6 months because we lost everything overnight. And I went right into a harvest put together by my colleagues. And then obviously now the world came to a bit of a slowdown after that. So
Sure.
Yeah, it's been a difficult couple of months, I must say. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, it was interesting too because as everything was happening, I was getting emails and reports from what was going on, and my heart was just breaking. And I was in the process of writing a piece about what was going on with your state and with your property and what your plan was. And as I was thinking about what I was going to write about, maybe halfway finished with it, all of Australia basically caught a blaze, and I felt now I can't do this because there's so many other people that suffered this, and but it was one of those things where it had to have been one of those things that kind of came at really challenging time, because as your state was growing, you're getting more popular, getting greater better accolades, and being more well known around the planet and the global wine market. This is coming after the New York Matter of Taste, where your wine was featured only one of 10 bottles from all of the wine reviewers, and within just a few weeks later, you're thrust in this situation. So will there be any like generational gaps, vintage gaps between vintages due to the loss of your cellar? I know you have cellars elsewhere, and you have product in a warehouse elsewhere.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the entire 2019 vintage was destroyed. So all of the wine that I had in the cellar is gone. Luckily, the bottled and labeled wine was stored off-site. And so it's why, although there was this catastrophic event that destroyed everything, the wine was able to stay in the market. Because 17 and 18 were current vintages, and I still had that stock. But obviously the panic, especially in those first hours and days, was, you know, what's going to happen when I hit this wall? And yeah, so I was able, with some help from my friends, able to pull together some, wine for the Age of Grace for 2019, some amazing, delicious Viognier, and a little bit of Chardonnay. But outside of that, 19 is basically a hole in the history of Lismore. And 20 hopefully is the resurrection of Lismore. Yeah,
like the Phoenix. So let's, because I'm sitting here staring at this bottle and this glass, and I mean, look at that Chardonnay. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. Let's go ahead and just dive into the 2017 Reserve Chardonnay. Take us through your thoughts on the vintage and then the élevage.
Look, 2017 was a fabulous vintage for me. It was quite easy. The grapes were healthy. The yields were balanced. They weren't particularly generous, but they also weren't particularly small. The thinking behind the Reserve Chardonnay. So my vineyards are, as I said, steep slopes basically at the foothills of a mountain at 325 meters, and they're dryland farms. So the berries come in really tiny and super concentrated. And traditionally, what I've always done is press the grapes, put them into older neutral 300-liter barrels, and natural ferment them and age them for 11 months. Well, as of 2016, I tried an experiment, and I basically moved to 500-liter large format barrels with 30% new. And that was the birth of the Reserve Chardonnay. And what's so beautiful about it is that it's such a distinct expression of place. But when you look at the normal Lismore Chardonnay and the Reserve Chardonnay, you actually have juice, similar juice from the same vineyards, that have now just been taken in two different directions by the winemaker, put into smaller barrels with the normal one, and larger barrels with the Reserve. And so with the smaller barrels, you get this more marmalade citrus. It's that kind of breakfast at Tiffany's, like toast and marmalade and citrus. And yet with the Reserve wine, what I find is that the citrus is less marmalade and more like charred lime, like you get with the fish taco. You know, I mean, it's so clearly, distinctively lime. It's linear, it's mineral, and yet it has that beautiful charry intensity that you get when you take a lime off the grill, you know.
Yeah, it has like this crystalline crispiness to it that's very, very food friendly. And anyone who's a Chardonnay lover, especially for people who enjoy Burgundy, you put this in your glass, in their glass, they're going to be confused, because they'll know it's not quite Burgundy, but they're like, this is still damn good. This is great. Yeah, I'm actually kind of I'm actually really thrilled that I'm enjoying this with you right now, because that means that I basically will be having chicken tonight. So I'm gonna make some roast chicken with beautiful Chardonnay. Awesome. When everything was going down, I had posted something on Facebook saying, my heart goes out to Samantha O'Keefe. I'm hearing news from Greyton. There was a few was like GoFundMe pages where people were trying to collect money to help you get back on your feet. I'd sent you a few emails just to reach out to you, just kind of see how you're doing, and never heard back from you. Trying to give you your space, but I was just trying to reach out and say, listen, we're with you. So sorry. Just trying to touch base. When I got the new wines, they were really focused and delicious. I was thinking about back when everything was happening. I still couldn't wrap my head around it. When I was younger, our home almost burnt down. I've had family that have been lost in fires, and it's not an easy thing. So to go through that, especially right as harvest is about to happen, it's a very challenging thing. I could imagine you were in shock for quite a few weeks and kind of feeling lost. But ultimately what happened was South Africa came knocking at your door, and they put grapes in your hand and they said, it's time to get back on the horse. Tell us about that experience. What was it like? You've just gone through this devastating experience, and you're still trying to kind of understand and process what's happening. And then you're basically thrust in the situation where South Africa, a lot of your colleagues ended up giving you barrels, giving you cellar space, and giving you grapes, saying, now it's time.
Basically, as you say, I was in shock, and my phone was binging and ringing with condolences and thoughts and prayers and love from all over the world, and it was just too much. I still even now find messages that I maybe missed at that time, because we were trying to find some of our animals were burned, and trying to assess and frankly just figure out what just happened to our life. My one son had been away with friends, so we were trying to get him back to be with us, and I wasn't really thinking clearly, and yet
no one does.
No. And yet immediately, we're talking like a week before Christmas. And as you said, 3 weeks before the South African harvest begins in earnest, my colleagues were basically figuring out, how do we get her through this? And my one colleague and friend, Alex Dale, contacted me about 36 hours after the fire and said, who is helping you with this? Who's everyone wants to help. Who's bringing it all together? Who's the central go-to person? And I was just like, and he said, okay, well, I'm appointing myself. So I'm that guy now. And like on all the social media, like I'm that guy. If you need help, or like go through me. And as you say, I was trying to figure things out. He was basically aggregating grapes and barrels and cellar space and transport and services and money, and and there's no way I would have been able to pull together grapes, and even with all the resources in the world that close to harvest, you just can't. And to make wine in the style that I do, you need a lot of older barrels, and so you can't just go out and buy new barrels. You need, and I had just lost 300 barrels. And I needed, if I was going to carry on, I needed 300 older barrels with a couple of new ones, thrown in for seasoning. And you know what? They arrived. They just, at some point, a couple of weeks later, Alex called me and said, more or less, like, you need to pick yourself off the floor, because I've got a spreadsheet and you need to get to work, and and the first grapes were coming in, and I didn't have a bed. I didn't have a bucket to make wine in, you know, and I just had to kick into gear. And so 150 tons later, I have made wine from kind of all over the Western Cape, and, you know, God bless my friends and colleagues, and a lot of help from strangers as well. It was really incredible. And I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today if it wasn't for them.
For sure. For sure. So now you find yourself in a situation where you have other varietals that you would have never or not have necessarily previously worked with. Tell us about those varietals and what you have found interesting about them, and ultimately when we can expect to see some of them in the market.
Yeah, you know, I've always been known for Chardonnay, Syrah, Viognier, and a barrel fermented Sauvignon Blanc. I introduced a experimental Pinot a couple of years ago, but in all of these abundant gifts, some Chenin came along as well. And what was so cool about this is that I'm a very lucky winemaker, because I actually have had a season where I've gotten to make wine from very distinctive terroirs. And, you know, I have Syrah from probably 20 sites, and that's not unusual for a lot of winemakers to have 20 sites, but to have them from the Swartland, which is our warm climate area, to Constantia, which is our, you know, original, the very first wine was grown and made in Constantia, and it's more maritime, to Elgin, which is our cool climate area, and Stellenbosch, the traditional heart, the more Napa of South Africa. And I have Syrah from all of those sites. And so not only do I have Chenin that was donated and given to me, but I have a Chenin from one of our most cool areas, Walker Bay, which is so linear and Loire and fresh and crystalline. And then I have this Chenin from old bushvine certified organic vineyards in just outside of Stellenbosch, which is, you know, concentrated and intense, and yet has this beautiful like core to it. And so it's exciting. It's been fun. I mean, you know, given how depressed I've been, it's been really fun.
Yeah. Are you allowed to talk about any of the producers that have given you grapes? Is that part of proprietary contacts?
It's certainly not secret, but I just feel so guilty, because if I start rattling them off and then I leave one out, then I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, because they all sacrificed a lot, Anthony. Yeah. They gave me grapes from their best vineyards. They made sure that they were delivered. They went to so much effort. I was constantly just stunned by how generous everyone was. And the only reason I don't want to sit and name a bunch of people, but I can tell you it's the best producers in South Africa, the most historic producers in South Africa, and it's really great. And I will make sure that when all the wines go out, everybody's name is there, but I just don't want to leave anyone out and hurt anyone.
For sure. Yeah, I remember first seeing pictures on social media, and you were there with some of the producers and grapes coming in, and thinking, oh, interesting. That's an interesting collaboration. I wonder because I know what these producers are doing with their grapes, and I know your style and your intent and your skill set. And yes, there is some overlap, but there is definite personalities to the wine. And you know, my brain starts going wild with, what is Sam going to do with this? And you try to paint a picture of the profile and the expression and how the palette and texture will be, but ultimately you never know until it's in bottle. So.
Well, and I know there are some people, hopefully that contingent is smaller and smaller in 2020, but there are some people who still question the idea of terroir. And, you know, I just tasted through all of these sites the other day, and, excuse me, I was in a gifted space. I basically was in small open fermenters from 0.5 ton to 2 tons, and more or less, with some experimentation, all of these sites were made the same. And so to have Syrah from very distinctive places in South Africa, made more or less the same. I mean, there is terroir. It's thrilling. It's actually, if you're a wine geek, it's flipping thrilling to taste through it all. And you know, whether I did the grapes justice. I hope I did. Obviously, I wasn't familiar with the sites. I did the best I could. And as you said, I made them in my style. I worked, with whole bunch. I generally was quite conservative with the whole bunch, starting at 40%, where normally I'd be very bold and work with 100%. But because I didn't know the vineyards, I pulled back a bit. But it's so cool. I don't think there's going to be anyone who's disappointed. I hope they don't try to make comparisons like her wine is, this
No,
wine is
yeah.
different than that, because that's exactly what it is. It's these hands, but with each one of those sites, and it's awesome.
So will you blend these sites together, or will you keep them separate in separate lots of bottlings?
I think if I can pull it off, I will definitely release, even if it's just 1,000 bottles of each site separate, because it's too great of an opportunity not to do that.
Agreed. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, it's funny. Some people say that terroir doesn't necessarily exist, and you can't taste the minerality of wine. There have been many papers written about it, but I completely disagree. I've said this before. My take on terroir and minerality is like walking up to freshly laid cement, putting your hand in it, walking away, and you're gone, but the imprint of your hand still exists. People will know the size, the shape, the width, the length, all of this, and it will stay there forever. Imprint. So I'm glad that you've decided to keep everything separate. It's not that it will be a competition or a comparison between these grapes and this wine from Sam and this wine from this producer, but it's just interesting to see what one person can do with the material they're given. I always use the example of, if you take 10 of the greatest painters on the planet, give them the same palette, the same easel, the same canvas, the same paints, same paintbrush, you're going to end up with 10 completely different paintings. All of them will be great, no doubt, but you're going to have 10 completely different paintings using different colors, different shades, different shapes, and that will leave an impression on the viewer of the painting. So it's always intriguing to see, when you have the same grapes, but the only difference really is intention and where the winemaker or the artist wants to take the wine and what they will create with it. So I greatly look forward to tasting and sampling those. When do you expect those to come around and be available in the market? I assume they probably won't be aged as long as
They probably won't be aged as long, but they are red wines. I think I would imagine 2020, 2021, probably towards the end of 2021. Yeah, maybe mid 2021. My UK agent was so excited when, literally right as I told him about this, and he's like, "Cool. So when are we going to get that?" And I said, 24 months from now.
Right.
And he's like, "What?" Like, wah wah wah. Like all the enthusiasm went away.
Right? I think great things take time. Don't rush it. Yeah, it's like people when they go out to restaurants, like, "Oh, I want a perfect medium rare steak, but I want it now." It's like, no, it's going to take time. You got to wait for it. Good things come to those who wait. So let's go back, shift gears, and go back towards and talk about your vineyards. When the fire came down the mountain, it ended up taking out close to about half of your vineyards. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, at least 45% were burned, if not more. And so we're still evaluating. It will only in time we'll know what the proper damage was. But yeah, about half. Yeah.
So do you intend on replanting with the same varietal, even same clone, or do you intend on possibly experimenting a touch, saying, I've always wanted to do this varietal or this clone in this spot. Now that you have an opportunity to kind of reinvent yourself and make a kind of like a second evaluation.
Yeah. I think it's a good question. It took me this long to figure out what works, and so I'm not all that interested in branching too far out. But what I can tell you is that I had already planted experimental plantings of Rousson and Marsanne. And for those people who don't know, my area, it's shale soil, steep slopes, diurnal temperature shift, very much a northern Rhone profile. And
sure.
so by 2016, I decided to experiment and plant some, in addition to Viognier and Syrah, which have become, very much standouts of my site. I had planted some Roussanne and Marsanne. Now, those vineyards were damaged. So right now, for the next 2 years, I'm just going to see what they give us. And in the 2020 harvest, they were supposed to give us the first crop. And so we dropped all the fruit just to try to save the vineyard. So you will see some new stuff coming out of Lismore, but it may be a while because I don't exactly know how the vineyards are going to recover.
Gotcha. So have you made any experimental modelings then from this Marsanne stuff?
No, because the first crop was going to come off in 2020. Yeah, and we had a good crop. It was a beautiful crop, but
All right. Yeah. Gotcha. So with that, have you done any or looked into any soil studies into whether the fire will basically give any lasting effects or damages to the vineyard that's remaining?
The studies coming out of Australia, and there are lots because Australia has unfortunately so much experience with fire damage, are not promising. With a lot of best intentions, I received a lot of studies from friends all over the world, and the bottom line is that a vine is like a person, and when it's burned, it may recover and it may live, but it won't thrive, you know. And what happens often, according to these studies, is that the vine at first just pushes and gives every bit of effort that it can, and it gives you so much hope because it just pushes out lots of leaves, and then by the end of year 2, it's dead.
Gotcha.
So, you look at those leaves, I mean, even after, we were about halfway through the life cycle of that season. And a lot of the vines did just that. They pushed so many bright, beautiful green leaves. It just made you feel so much hope. But in the end, they are burn victims. Yeah. And so we will see. Only time will tell. It's such an inconclusive answer, and I know everyone wants an answer from me, and you're not the first one to ask me. But all I can say is only time will tell.
Yeah, I've been researching different studies, and I've heard about the same. I've heard closer to 3 to 4 years of the vines kind of come back brighter, and they have a big pop. And from what I've gathered, is the vine realizes it's damaged, and it just tries to give up as much fruit as possible because it knows it's not well and its time is coming soon. So it tries to reproduce itself with as much fruit as possible, and then declines rather rapidly. So in the process of rebuilding and replanting, rebuilding your home, rebuilding your cellar, and replanting your vineyards, do you have anything that you're looking to do differently as far as, say, placement of your home or winery, or even declination of your vineyards?
Well, okay, the home is being kind of built on its foundation by the insurance company. So, and I don't have the time or energy to care to move it or change it anyway. So they're going to rebuild the house as it was, or as, I don't know, their version of what it was. The cellar, ironically, I only built the cellar about 4 years ago, and the cellar was supposed to be built so we could bottle under roof. And then they put the support beam, like the roof level I needed was the roof, but the support beam made it this much too low. And so we're changing that. Everybody's like, what can you do better? And I said, my cellar was perfect. I love my cellar. But what could you do better? It's like, no, we need to raise the roof that much so that I can bottle. So I can bottle undercover, like was the plan. That was a bit of a bugger up. and then I'm going to build some offices onto the cellar. But for the most part, look, Anthony, I loved my cellar. You didn't have an opportunity to visit me yet there, but it was a very utilitarian cellar. But it was functional and it was beautiful. And after 16 years, I knew exactly what fancy things I didn't need, and I knew exactly what I did need. And so all I want is for it to be back the way it was.
For sure. I can respect that. Yeah, I've seen pictures of your cellar, and it reminds me very much of a kind of small boutique commercial cellar that you would expect to find in like Los Olivos or like Santa Barbara. It had this, it was perfectly functional, and it seemed to be stacked exactly the way you would want to fill a cellar. So there wasn't necessarily too much leftover room, but it was perfectly functional. So
Yeah.
I hope that insurance isn't giving you too much of a hassle, and you can put everything back the way it was, and or if not better, raise the roof by your bottle size.
Yeah, we need to raise the roof. Yeah.
Raise the roof. Awesome. So you've got boys. You've got some children. Do you hope that your boys follow in your footsteps and keep Lismore in the family? Would you like it to be like a generational heirloom project?
I would love that. I've said to my boys I would really like for them to go out into the world and have some life and bring that experience back into Lismore. You know, I came into Lismore at 30 years old, and I brought my own life experience, and that has helped me have the tools to grow it. But obviously, I also lack a lot of other experience, and so I would love for them to go out and get experience if they want to come back. But look, they help in the cellar. They very much are brand ambassadors. They're very much part of the brand, and I consult them in many ways, especially as they get older. And my son Quinn, in 2018, made a wine that was released, and he has his own importer in the UK. It all went to the UK, so the US didn't get any of it. But it was an egg fermented Sauvignon Blanc called Flora, and it like sold out. It was at a 3-star Michelin restaurant by the glass, another 1-star Michelin restaurant by the glass. So he and then my eldest son did the labels, and they did all the labeling and the waxing of the bottles and everything together. Nice. So yeah, they definitely, they caught the bug, put it that way.
That works. Awesome. Yeah. So do they are they continuing with this brand, or is it just like a one-off, or do they want to continue to make this?
Well, so as wine goes, 18, Quinn made Flora. The only reason Keenan, my older son, wasn't involved is because he was off at boarding, and Quinn had been left behind as like an only child on the farm. So Quinn was in the cellar with me, and it's a long story how this project came about, but he ended up having this project that was all his. And then it was released during the 19 vintage, to huge acclaim and lots of attention, as teenage boys like to have. International critics who were based in London were all like a buzz about it. And so everybody was like, 2020, this is happening. And now both boys were involved, and they had lots of great ideas. But obviously then, the fire happened, and it was put on hold.
And then global quarantine
and then global quarantine, a whole pandemic thing that just like is a nuisance, gets in the way.
Yeah, I mean, you've really had a really challenging 8 months, 7 months. It's crazy. I'm just sitting here thinking, some people are complaining about because they can't go out and do this, or they can't have, they don't do this or can't get that. But yeah, your entire life has basically been flipped upside down and then put right, and then you put on the fast track to get everything going, and then hit the brakes super hard. It's like up and down, go. It's tough. So I really look forward to trying your new wines. So for moving forward for the 2020 vintage, will there be a bottling that you'll have the most amount of bottles, meaning
From
the bottling
2020.
for 2020 that was
Look,
not quite affected?
I normally produce about 15,000 bottles of the core Lismore wines, and that the Chardonnay, Barrel Fermented Sauvignon, Age of Grace, Viognier, and Syrah. Because 19 was destroyed, I have overproduced those wines a bit, so there'll be quite a bit of those wines in 2020. I suspect, unless everybody rushes to buy everything and it sells out, in a week, I think you might see those vintages in the market for a year and a half. That would be the plan. To be able to, if we planned it properly, then we have at least a year and a half of 2020 so that we can start to catch up the vintage cycle. But the wines look amazing. The Barrel Fermented Sauvignon was done in one cellar with a dear friend of mine, Joris van Elmenkirk, here in South Africa. The Age of Grace was done in another cellar with Peter Allen Finlayson at Habro's Kloof here in South Africa. So, and the bulk of my stuff was at Radford Dell. It was really spread over the Western Cape, and this was very much a team effort this year to get me through this. And I can look back on it and say it was fun, but at the time it wasn't fun.
That's a great way to look at it.
I've forgotten how the hard part, and I'm already thinking back with whimsically, but yeah, it was hard, but it was okay.
Yeah, I believe that when we have bad times in life, they only prove to make the great times that much greater. So you have a little more respect for them. So with the global, or with the countrywide kind of ban on alcohol, there was a ban on export and a ban of alcohol sales when quarantine first went into effect earlier this year. About 5 or 6 weeks ago, that was repealed, where you could actually purchase alcohol, and then without notice, the president of South Africa gets on the news and basically says, "All right, starting immediately, no more sales." I know you had just opened your tasting room earlier, just a few months ago. I assume it's still closed. When do you see that remaining open once everything is ultimately able to go back to normal and sell alcohol again?
Okay, so right before the fire, I'd opened this really lovely little charming tasting room in the village of Greyton, which is the village in the mountains where the farm is, to lots of excitement, at least on my part. And and then a couple of months later, this COVID thing happened, and South Africa was very unique in the world in that, along with the standard huge lockdown that the other countries did, they banned alcohol and cigarettes. So they locked everybody in their house without alcohol and cigarettes. Now, I'm not a smoker. I kind of don't care, but it was illogical. Okay. And you can imagine how people felt about not having access to buy alcohol. But we'd been given about 4 days notice, if I remember. It was less than a week, but more than 4 days the first time around. So everybody rushed out and filled their house, and they were told it was for 3 weeks. So you're going to be locked in your house for 3 weeks. You can't go out, but and you can't have alcohol or cigarettes. Now that was extended and extended. Long story short, here we are in July. That started the 24th of March, and cigarettes have never been allowed since the 24th of March. There's a nice black market apparently out there for them. But as you said, we have entered a new level of prohibition here in South Africa. Now, I think the first time around, everybody had a really good attitude about it. And, we're all in this together, and it's a global pandemic, and we all want to help, and we'll stay locked in our house and drink our wine. But obviously, we've lost our sense of humor, I think, as consumers and as producers. The restaurant industry is dying.
Yeah.
The alcohol industry, the South African wine industry directly employs about 300,000 people. If you take that to the liquor industry, like bottle stores and wine shops and bars and anybody connected to alcohol, you're looking at 1 million South Africans. And then with the restaurants and the tourism, you're looking at several million South Africans. And so we are all trying to work towards the same goal that the world is with this COVID story, but to keep that many people unemployed is not working, and it seems to be driven by more prohibitionist motives than medical ones. So South Africa's frustrated.
I think the entire world is losing patience with itself. But this is, I suppose, one more reason to start a cellar and know how to maintain a cellar. So just in case things get tougher, you could always go to your cellar, open up a few bottles if you need to, and
I mean, look, for those people who were blessed enough to have big stock cellars, they were fine for a while. but you start to get to the bottom of your cellar and you start to panic. One man said to me, it was very funny, he said, obviously he drank all the cheap wine first, and then he goes through the kind of like special wines, and then by the end, all those wines that he was saving, he was drinking them. And he said, I'll never be the same again. Like, I can't drink cheap wine anymore. I drank for 2 weeks. I was at the bottom of my cellar drinking all the special wines that I had set aside. And now like, that's all I want to drink, so it's a double-edged sword, I guess.
For sure. I was talking to some of my Psalm friends in South Africa, and they were saying that pineapple, the fruit, was a really, really big commodity because people would crush it quickly and turn that into whatever alcohol you want to use it for. But that's how you know.
It's pineapple beer. It's pineapple beer, and it's a thing. Now, I grew up in California, so I don't have the cultural reference of pineapple beer, but apparently, especially if you grew up in Natal, which are the more tropical areas of South Africa, that was a thing growing up, is people made pineapple beer. So you just need a bucket and some pineapples and some bread yeast, and sugar and white sugar. And so during lockdown, when alcohol was prohibited, a lot of the grocery stores, you walked in the front door and it was like plastic buckets, white sugar, pineapples, and bread yeast on a table. I mean, how funny. They got in trouble for that, by the way.
The struggle is real. The struggle is real.
That is real.
So let's change gears back to Greyton. So you basically launched the Greyton wine region. Now there's a few other farms there, but you're basically still the only commercial winery in Greyton. What do you hope to see Greyton, the wine region, become?
Obviously, a world famous wine region, and my legacy will be solidified. No, look, it has proven itself for amazing, cool climate, elegant wines. It is very unique by South African standards, and I would love to see winemakers come in and experiment and make the most of the region. I think it's going to be a while. Wine takes time, and land is expensive, and so I don't know if that's going to happen in my lifetime. I certainly will be an old lady if it does, but there is so much potential in Greyton, and I know that more and more of my colleagues know it and they see it. It's taking the step to actually buy land, plant vineyards, wait 10 years. You just need to have the right people with the right pioneering spirit, because the reality is that I may have been the pioneer, but the next 5 are going to be pushing boundaries along with me, and And I'm just waiting. There are, as you said, there's about, I think I counted about 4 hectare, but in like a half a hectare here, 1 hectare there, plots outside of Lismore. But I would love for somebody to just come in and plant 20 more hectare and just say, let's do this. Maybe experiment with some Pinot and make some really great wine out of there. I would love it. I'd support anybody. If anyone wants to buy land in Greyton and plant 20 hectare, here's your opportunity. Yeah.
There you go. Awesome. So ultimately, where do you see Lismore, the brand, in say 20 years time?
In my perfect world, I would love for Lismore to just be a good old stable go-to for classic premium wine. I feel I'm almost there as a brand, and if it could just be an old standby where everyone knows the name and everyone knows they're going to get something great, and by then my sons will have their sub brand to do all the experimental interesting stuff, and people just trust that and they know that anything out of Lismore is going to be delicious and classic and world class. That I would love that. And I would love it to be no more than probably double the size that it is now. That would be my ideal. Yeah.
Still keeping it rather boutique.
I would. The idea that these pictures of California cellars and where it's just barrels stacked 14 high and long.
Sure.
No, I'd rather raise the price.
There you go. Yeah, there's that model as well.
Yeah, someone will bring up this video 20 years from now and be like, remember, she told us.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. So I know it's getting late there. I won't keep you for too much longer. But you've been through a lot in the last 8 months. Do you have any, say, like thoughts or parting words or just reflections for us that you've kind of come to realize over the last 7-8 months?
As I sat with my insurance man over the years, I always said to him, if there's a fire that takes everything out, it's over. And so why are we even going through this exercise? Because if a fire comes through and takes out my house, my cellar, my vineyards, it's done. Well, that worst case scenario happened, and I got up the next day and knew I was just going to rebuild and keep going. And so, the world right now is facing its own fire, and it feels like everyone is losing their life, their businesses, their homes, their way of life, their life, not just their livelihood, but their lifestyle. Everything has come to a standstill, and I know people are panicking, but just know that you just get up the next day and move forward, and it's going to be okay, and you're going to rebuild, and you might even rebuild it better, a little bit higher than it was before, so that you can bottle underneath the roof, but I know that it seems, if that moment came, it would be over for me, but it's actually not. It's not.
Yeah. Awesome. I believe these are the moments that define our character and who we ultimately will become in life. So I do believe, or I do know one thing, that the wine industry needs more badass females in it, like yourself. So keep on going.
Thanks.
We wish you the best. Yeah. It's been a crazy last few couple months, but I know that with your skill set and your talent, you're gonna be all right. It's gonna be a little bumpy.
And determination.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You've got the drive, and you've got the passion. So again, I greatly look forward to sampling your single varietal bottlings from all of your colleagues from all over South Africa. I think as anyone in any profession, when they have suffered what you've gone through, and your direct competitors come at you with what with the love and respect that they have, I think it shows light years of what your skill set and talent is, and what you mean to South Africa. So, yeah, you're appreciated, and keep on making this amazing juice because it's stellar.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
So until then,
Thank
stay safe, drink well, and be kind to others.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Thanks for having me. Hey.
Always a pleasure. Cheers.
Okay. Bye-bye.